I want to welcome all of you to this 5-session study in the book of Exodus entitled, What Are You Going Through? A journey into, through, and out of the wilderness. As we enter into the book of Exodus, walking with the Israelites in their wilderness journey, we read parallels in our human interaction with God. The wilderness journey serves our need for a deepening relationship with the divine, forged through emptying, struggle, suffering, and faith. Faith that God is active even when we cannot sense it. This study will take us backward in order to see forward, listening to God's activity into, through, and out of the wilderness. What are you going through? How have you experienced this past year? If you are anything like me, you have meandered aimlessly, struggled mightily, and searched diligently for God's activity in your life and in the life of the world. I hope this study reveals what can perhaps only be seen in the rear view mirror of our caravan across the desert. The book of Exodus moves from slavery to worship, from Israel's bondage to Pharaoh to its bonding to Yahweh. It moves from the enforced construction of building for Pharaoh to the glad and obedient offering of the people for a building for the worship of God. Exodus advances from an oppressive situation in which God's presence is hardly noted to God's filling the scene at the completion of the tabernacle. 2020 and 2021 have been a wilderness journey for the whole world. COVID-19 launched us out from the familiar and into the unknown. We have learned some things about the familiar, that not all that we have is worth retaining, that we were in bondage in ways both known and unknown, and that the journey forward is fraught with fear, uncertainty, frustration, and grief. The book of Exodus, between those bookends I described above, is full of an amazing range of activity. From plagues to seawalls to wilderness wanderings to fiery mountains and golden calves. God acts, God is forgotten, the people are faithful, the people fall apart, but through it all, the promise of the future never wanes, whereby God will deliver the people. For this study, I am indebted to Dr. Terry Fretheim, former professor of Old Testament theology at Luther Seminary in St. Paul. Dr. Fretheim died in this COVID season, a death that I mark with sincere gratitude for his teaching in my life. My very first class at seminary was an interdisciplinary course led by Dr. Fretheim from the Old Testament department alongside Dr. David Teedy from the New Testament department. And as raw as I was in my understanding of the journey before me, I can identify with the Israelites in their early entry into the wilderness. Disorientation, uncertainty, and fear accompanied me. And I give thanks to God for Terry Fretheim and David Teedy, who had the compassionate wisdom to begin leading me across my own wilderness journey with God. And so, dear people listening in, taking heart and courage to enter into the study of Exodus, we begin with fear and trepidation, stepping forward together into the wilderness. You see, these wilderness wanderings, or at least their length and their breadth, were a surprise to the Israelites. Instead of a land flowing with milk and honey, they get a desert. The promise falls short. Deliverance at the sea leads into God-forsaken wilderness. Dancers and singers are stopped dead in their tracks. Salvation from one kind of death leads into the teeth of another. The sea-crossing glory seems but a point of unreal exhilaration between one kind of trouble and another. Only the last seems worse than the first. Bondage with security and provision seems preferable to freedom and living from one oasis to another. The wilderness is a place betwixt and between. And the first realization of the people is there is no water. The very foundation of life, survival, is nowhere to be found. And from this loss comes the pattern that will serve the Israelites' relationship with Yahweh all throughout the journey. 1, a problem arises. 2, the people complain. 3, Moses intercedes on behalf of the people. And 4, God responds with deliverance. And not only does God respond, but God uses the very elements of the wilderness, the creation's providential design from the beginning to meet the needs of the people. Read Exodus 15, 22 through 27 carefully, which is the conclusion of our study text for this week. 15:22 marks a sharp contrast with 15:21 as the people move quickly from celebration of victory to the recognition of their survival need. Lest they become too settled in what has happened behind them, God launches them, drives them into the next phase of their journey, and they quickly realize they can do nothing without God. Water is gone. The only discovered water is bitter. And God shows Moses a piece of wood. That's it. A piece of wood. Sufficient in its creational composition to turn the bitter water into drinking water. Enough to lead the people to a place of 12 springs and 70 palm trees. Enough for all of the 12 tribes of Israel, and enough shade in which the chosen 70 elders might rest. And so we enter the wilderness, dear people, leaving behind what is now gone. For what will be provided will be enough. Just enough.